I so wish I had this video back when I first started collecting. Hello friends, I hope you are doing well. Today I'm going to be running through pretty much all of my plant supplies, things that I pretty much deem maybe not essential, but like very useful, if not essential, within my plant care game. Things that make my life easier, things that I just find work really well. Just going through pretty much everything with y'all today. Before we get into it though, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you are not new here, thank you so much for returning. I really appreciate it. I should also say that this video is sponsored by Plants with Willow, which I will talk about a little bit later on in the video. And also, every single thing that I could possibly have a link for will be down below in the description. So save this as a resource, if nothing else, so you can find all these products really easily. So first off, let's start with pots. And I personally keep pretty much all of my plants that are in soil within their nursery pots in a cache pot. And I find that's the easiest way for me to make sure that they don't get overwatered or underwatered. And you can just keep the nursery pots they come with. I have about 1 billion nursery pots in my cupboard, but my preference is definitely getting some sort of clear pot. So you can just go for like the clear classic orchid pot. Unfortunately, you'd have to spend money to get these things, whereas in theory, all of the sort of orange-black nursery pots you're be getting for free, so they aren't essential, but I find them really useful to have a look at root health and get a better eye on what's going on in your collection. So I highly recommend clear pots if you can, and when I possibly can put things in clear pots, I will. There's also these aeroid tower pots, which I personally use 3 main sizes, from this little dinky boy here to the medium one and this sort of tall one. They do make bigger ones of these as well. I've personally not tried them, but I do really like these. I think they work really well. These are called aeroid tower pots, and they work really well for aeroids. I find putting an anthurium in something like this with a tall root system, it does really well, and they really like it. And this one isn't as clear, but you can still see what's going on with the roots, and so I find it incredibly useful. You can go a step further even and get a pot like this. So this one, it's an root spiral pot. And so it's got these little divots in the side here, which stop the roots from spiraling round and round the bottom of it when they get bigger, which I think is probably best for root health, and it'll make it easier to unpot in order to repot down the line. So I really like these. Again, you'll have to pay for them, but I do think that they are worth a little bit of an investment, and you can get the clear orchid pots for not very much, but it'll still be more than you're paying for the nursery pot that your plant already comes in. I also have several different types of self-watering pots that I use specifically for plants in semi-hydro, which I use a lot of as well. And I really like self-watering pots for these because it just makes it easier to water them, especially ones with windows. I have loads and loads of these sort of small ones, and then there's just a reservoir of water at the bottom. And also I take the wick out and I cut up a microfiber cleaning cloth and use that as a wick instead, because these don't get moldy like a sort of cotton wick would. Just because it's staying constantly wet, it gets a bit grunge. So better to be safe than sorry. I really like these pots. Even better, basically it's the same type of pot, but with a clear insert, and I freaking love these. So it's got a clear insert, which means I can keep an eye on the root growth, and I'm not just relying on what I can see out of the bottom of the pot. You can see the roots are coming out a little bit here, but I really like that you can see the root growth on there because it gives me a better idea about when I need to repot my plants, and I can keep a better eye on root health. I feel like that's kind of the most important thing with pots. You want to be able to keep an eye on root health, but not all self-watering pots are like that. In fact, most of them aren't. My other favorites, which are cheap and cheerful, and like the best thing ever, and I wish they made more of them. You can tell mine is very well used. This is an Elho self-watering insert. So you would put this in a cash pot that you get, typically an Elho one, which I'll talk about more in a sec. And you can put the semi-hydro in there. It's got a little adorable indicator there, which is a little leaf, which I think is a little bit cuter than the sort of red spike that most other self-watering pots have, but it's not necessary. I just think it's a little bit of cuteness. And these are very, very inexpensive. I love that. And you can get them in a variety of sizes. Unfortunately, this is the smallest size they have. I think this is a 17 centimeter one, but they go up to like 30 or more in this. So you could have a gigantic plant in a self-watering pot from Elho. Like, it's just so good. I really, really, really wish they made smaller sizes. The only reason I have these ones is because they don't make smaller sizes of the Elho ones, because if they did, I would only use these, genuinely. And I know it's a shame because they're not clear, but these are my absolute frickin' favorites. Speaking of Elho as well, we can talk about cash pots. With cash pots, I have collected them from like over the years, just from different plant shops, from charity shops and things like that. But my absolute favorites are these ones from Elho. So they are a plastic material. So they're really lightweight. I don't need to worry about them breaking if they fall off a shelf or anything like that. Unfortunately, it's not gonna be like heavy bottomed if you need like the pot to hold the plant like steady. It won't do that, but I love these, and they come in loads of different colors and styles. I really like the very neutral plain ones. This is their like gray, this is their white. I think this one is really quite stunning. And again, they do them in all of the sizes, from like a little 7 centimeter all the way up to like 40. Which is absolutely insane. And I'm pretty sure these are also, yeah, made from recycled plastic, which is really, really cool. So even though they are plastic and that's not an ideal material, it is recycled plastic, which is better than just getting plain plastic pots. So also these are very inexpensive, which is another huge bonus because I have so many of them throughout my house and I always need more. So getting new ones is not like a huge, like breaking the bank, because some pots, especially like big ceramic ones, they will freaking cost you. And I don't have that kind of money to spend on pots. I'd rather spend it on plants. I also have loads of different plants in sort of no drainage vessels. And for the most part, I get these from charity shops, kind of just big vases or whatever. I think they work really well. Highly recommend getting ones without a bottleneck because it makes it easier for them to like come out when you need to like upsize them. I learned that the hard way. Luckily, I didn't have to break my glass, but it did take a lot to get the plant out of that pot. But I really like these, a nice clear one. You can also get them in different like colors. I personally prefer the clear glass ones. You can get a dark or colored glass as well, or even an opaque one if you pair it with a moisture, like water level sensor, which I have from like old self-watering pots. You can also buy them straight from places like Amazon. I have some of these for really tall plants as well, which I find incredibly useful. It makes figuring out when to water a little bit easier because with these no drainage pots, like from a glance, you can't tell exactly where the water level is until you look up quite close, and then you can see it is about there. But if I had a water level indicator in this, the little red indicator thing would tell me whether or not I need to refill this reservoir. So highly recommend these for your no drainage vessels. I think it makes it so much easier. And in theory as well, you could use it with an opaque jar. So could be an option. This no drainage vessel here is actually a food storage jar. I got a pack of a bunch of them on Amazon with lids, and I actually originally got these for my soil component storage. This one still has the pumice sticker on it, but now I've also started using them as no drainage jars because I think they're pretty much the perfect jar. They're nice and tall, so you can get a nice reservoir down the bottom. They're very clear. They're not too thick and heavy. And like, there's no bottleneck or like going in at the top, and they're just absolutely stunning. Getting into plant supports, I use a few different types of things to support my plants, to hold them up. One of which is trellises. I really love these sort of clear acrylic trellises. You can get other sort of ones, but my best advice is get ones that don't have a loop around the bottom, that are a full U shape, because I can, in theory, just pull this out at the top and I don't have to worry about untangling every freaking vine, which I have done on plants before. Or actually, I ended up cutting an old trellis because I needed to get the Hoya off of it. These are really useful for plants like Hoyas who like having the support. I also use them to hold up my begonias because those tend to flop over if they don't have something to support. But I really like these sort of clear acrylic ones because they're super minimalist and like they're not obtrusive, like you kind of don't even really see it. You can get more decorative ones as well. I also really love my iridescent ones as a bit of like fun, like pop of color in there, just a little bit of whimsy to add to my collection. I think they're cool, and again, very minimal and sleek, and do the job to hold my plants up just fine. And as you can see, I've got these little clips on here holding the plant to the support, and these ones are just little dragonfly clips I got off Amazon. You can just get normal plant clips, but having something to hold the plant to the trellis is very important. You could use a bit of string even, just make sure you're not tying it too tight that you're like breaking the stem, because you don't want to do that. In recent years, I've also found these cool new things that like kind of look like an octopus on a stick, and I actually use these for my alocasias because I don't know about you, but I find that sometimes my alocasias, they like to spread out quite a lot. They don't like to stand upright unless they're getting light from directly over the top. They like to kind of spread out, and I don't have space for all of my alocasias to spread out all that much, so having something like this is good because I can hook the stems into these hook things and it'll hold them more upright and central. You can get these in a variety of sizes as well and on different height of sticks, but they work really well for holding your plants up, a bit nicer than just tying them up, which I have done for a lot of my plants as well. I will tie them up with something like garden Velcro, which I also use on my moss poles, but I'll pop a stake, like even if I just had this bit, I'll pop a stake into the substrate and then get a loop of the computer Velcro or garden Velcro. They work exactly the same. I tend to get computer Velcro because I think it's a little bit cheaper than garden Velcro. Like it's used for like cable management with computers, and I kind of like that it's black as opposed to green. That's just a personal preference thing, but I'll make a loop around this and loop all the leaves in that and hold them up to the stake. So both of those are perfectly good options for holding your plants up like that. I've also used them for anthuriums and stuff before, but for the most part, I use these for alocasias. And then the last sort of support system thing is moss poles. I have so many different moss poles throughout my home, so many plants on them. I've found ever since I started using these little D-shape moss poles, my plants have loved it. These hold in the moisture really well. So it's basically a like clear plastic sheet on the back and wire mesh on the front, and you stick the moss in the middle and the plant goes on that. And these tend to stay a lot more moist than the ones that are like wire mesh all the way around. And so I use these from Grow Vertical. I got a massive multi-pack because they're an Australian company, and so I wanted like a ton of them. And they have really like small skinny ones to really tall big fat ones, like my big Mandula pothos and my Raphidophora tetrasperma. They're on these massive huge poles, like really wide, and can hold a lot of moss and really can support the plant and its needs. But I really love these ones. I've also DIY'd several. I can link my DIY video down below with all of the supplies that I used to make my own. These are the majority of the poles I have in my home, but in the last, I mean, really not that long. I think I got my first ones in like December or January of this year. In the last several months, I have started to transition over to front opening moss poles. like this one. So these are poles that have the same D shape, so they hold in the moisture in the same sort of way, but they open in the front, meaning that when it's time to repot this plant, or if I want to like chop it to propagate, it's so much easier to get it off the pole because I can just open up all the different little grips in here. I can just open them all up, and it's like I can take the whole thing out and even put that into a bigger front opening moss pole so easily. So I highly recommend these ones. I've tried a few different ones, and there's not very many sellers in the EU of them. I will link the ones that I like the best down below, but I wish more companies would do these, and I wish I could get like big ones of these as well, because I find that they don't really have very many big front opening moss poles. They're pretty much all like this size or a little bit bigger. But like I have some gigantic plants on moss poles that I guess I'm not taking them off as frequently, so I wouldn't need the front opening poles as much, but I think it would be quite useful. And with these, I can use the little connection things to attach the plant to the pole and like connect it with the moss as well, so I don't need to use the computer Velcro, which I do have to use on the other D-shaped moss poles. So it is like less steps as well. And one more thing I love about the D-shaped poles, especially the ones with the plastic, like clear plastic backs, is that it really lets you see into the poles and see how the roots are going, to see whether or not they're doing well and actually gripping into the pole. And I really like to be able to see that and just know that they're getting the support they properly need. Next category is watering, and there's a few different phases within that. First off, I'm going to talk about when to water. Like I said, with my semi-hydro, no drainage stuff, my plants have these indicator things, which I really like, or the pots have windows, and so I can tell when to water. With plants in soil, because I've had quite a lot of practice over the years, I've kind of gotten a pretty good handle on when plants are dry. Even just with sticking my finger in the soil, I find that is pretty easy. You don't technically need any tools to do this, but there are a few tools that helps me out to like make my plants grow better. Back in the beginning, I don't really use this much anymore, but back in the beginning of my planting journey, I used a moisture meter religiously. I find it really useful to figure out if your plant is wet or dry all the way down in the pot. And for plants that are bigger and I can't stick my finger all the way down, having this little probe thing is really nice to tell whether or not the plant is dry further down, so whether or not it's ready to water. This is very useful for that. But like I said, I don't really use this anymore. And over time, planting technology has advanced quite a lot. And there's actually now smart plant sensors that you can pop into your plant's soil, and they can automatically notify you when your plants need water, which is really exciting. And today's video sponsor, Willow, is one of those items. The Willow plant sensors would have been an absolute game changer at the beginning of my plant collecting journey. They definitely would have saved many a plant from an untimely death due to underwatering or overwatering. With these, you actually start off by getting a hub, which I have plugged in my home already, and each hub can connect up to like 40 sensors or something, and this bit goes into the soil, and these little things will sense the like moisture levels of your soil, and then this sends the information to the hub and then to your phone in the app, where you can get all of the information, and it will send you notifications about when to water, as well as information about lighting, temperature, and humidity. There's just so much going on in this little thing. I find it like immensely useful even today, and though I couldn't possibly put them in every single one of my nearly 200 plants in my collection because that would be a little bit outrageous, I still find them very useful for select plants here and there. I tend to use them in plants that I need a little bit of help with, whether I've been struggling with them or they're new or I'm moving them into a new spot and I want to know the best practices for that in the new place. And Plants with Willow have very kindly given me an affiliate code to share with all of you. So you can use my code GoodGrowing10 down below at the link in the description for 10% off your orders. So I highly recommend you go claim it now. Thank you so much, Willow, for sponsoring this video. So now that we know when to water, we can get into how I water. I pretty much exclusively use this watering can from Amazon. It is a 3-liter capacity, which I find works pretty well for me. If I'm doing a big, gigantic water, I do have to go back and forth to my sink a few times over. But if I am just watering a single area, it'll pretty much cover a good chunk at a time. And I really like that it's got a nice accurate spout so I can really get into the plant that I'm watering. I do also have this sort of pump sprayer. I did use it for a while, but I do find it's kind of annoying to lug around, and in order to get it pressurized to spray, you have to pump it a lot, and it takes a whole lot of effort. And while I don't need to be going back and forth to the sink as frequently when I use this, it's just a little bit too annoying to pull out and stuff like that. So I don't tend to use this that often. But what I do use it for fairly regularly, I guess twice a year, is when I use nematodes, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the pest section. But I find that this works really well because I do big batches of the nematodes, and having a big container to do that is really useful. And this one did come with a little nozzle head with smaller holes, but I've just taken that off so it runs more similarly to how a watering can spout would put out water. It doesn't spray as much as it kind of trickles out, depending on the pressure, obviously, that you are using and how much pumping you've done to get into that point. I also have this pump sprayer, which I don't actually use for watering, but I use for when I pest treat my plants. When I did my big sulfur pest treatment for flat mites, I found doing a spray bottle was absolutely exhausting, and so getting a pump spray bottle worked really, really well. And it's not huge, it's really easy to deal with. Luckily, I haven't had to use this pretty much since that big original flat mite debacle, so very glad about that. But I do still have it, and there is still probably some sulfur water in the bottom of this if I did need to use it going forward. But yeah, I do really like this one. It was a lifesaver back when I was doing that big treatment. Speaking of pests, I try to be quite natural with my pest treatment, insofar as I mostly try and do prevention as opposed to curative things. I'd rather stop the problem before we get there than having a big problem that I need to react to. I find that I end up saving more money that way, even though I do have a regular subscription for these amblyceus predatory mites, which work against thrip eggs and larvae. They don't kill the adults, so if you get a problem with adults, these aren't going to help you, but they will reduce the larvae and egg population. And I get 50 of these sachets every 6 weeks on subscription, and I find that they have severely reduced my thrips issues. I used to have so many problems with thrips over the years, and not until I started using these properly and regularly and being very on top of it did I actually notice my thrip issues start to actually go away. I will still spot one here and there. They come in on I don't know, fruit or new plants, or they can come in if your windows are open, unfortunately. So I will still spot them here and there, but these will very much so eradicate the problem before it gets too out of hand. So I freaking love these things. You can also get slow release subscription sachets for spider mites, but that doesn't tend to be as big of an issue within my collection, and so I treat those as and when, really. But you can get similar mites for those. For spider mite treatment, I pretty much only use isopropyl alcohol, and I do a solution with that and water and horticultural soap, which is just kind of I'm pretty sure you can use Dawn dish soap as well, or Dr. Bronner's Castile soap. Very mild, unscented soap will work well to help get rid of pests, but it is a spot-on treatment. It's going to kill the ones that are on the plant right then and there, the isopropyl and the horticultural soap. It's not going to prevent it for long periods of time. So with the horticultural soap and isopropyl alcohol, I use a shaver brush, a men's shaver brush, or a clean makeup brush, and I will dip it in that solution and then wipe it over my leaves. I find that this works really well to like not put too much pressure onto the leaves, and you can be very gentle and nice and just kind of wipe it over that. You can also use a sponge, but depending on the leaf texture, it might not work as well. So using things like this is a good, easy idea. If I'm finding that I'm experiencing big bouts of pests, specifically thrips, which I have had before, and sometimes very occasionally do get again, the sort of like big nasty black thrips, those I will unfortunately deal with Provanto, which is a chemical pesticide. And I really only like to use that as a very last resort. If I like can't isolate a plant or something because it's too big to put it somewhere else, or if the problem has gotten too big, I will use it, unfortunately, and it's purely for my own sanity and peace of mind, because I cannot be treating a ton of my plants all the freaking time for pests. That's just, it would drive me over the edge. I don't think I could handle it, but I like to avoid that where possible. To deal with fungus gnats, like I mentioned earlier, I use beneficial nematodes pretty much twice a year, usually in like spring and autumn. And with my sprayer, I go through and spray all of my plants in soil. I pop it all over up into my moss pole and get them pretty much everywhere they possibly can be in order to eat all of the fungus gnats. Unfortunately, it's not a big problem for your plants. They're more just annoying. So I tend to do my repetition of these when I start noticing that like more fungus gnats are flying about and they're annoying me. Honestly, because my collection is so big, I don't think I can ever get rid of fungus gnats completely, but the nematodes really do make things a lot easier and like less annoying. And that in conjunction with the yellow sticky traps to like collect the adults that fly around do really help. I get these in big sheets and then I cut them down to smaller sizes. I know you can get ones that you can stick into your pots as well, but I like these better. I don't know why, I just do. I actually don't have any around in my collection at the minute, and I don't have a massive issue with fungus gnats right this second. So everything's working and going in the right direction. These nematodes, spot on. Before we get into the next section, substrates, I need to change my camera battery really quick, so BRB.
5 minutes later.
I'm back and I got myself an iced coffee during this time as well, because your girl's thirsty, because I'm doing so much talking, but it's so freaking worth it. Like, I so wish I had this video back when I first started collecting, because it would have made like so much, like I could have just not wasted my money on so many things. But yeah, okay. Carrying on, we are going to talk about substrates, and I pretty much exclusively use Soil Ninja. I love all of their substrates and their components and stuff. I pretty much exclusively use 4 of their things. So for general planting, as well as Monstera and philodendrons, I use their Monstera and philodendron soil. I find that it's pretty good, like, base houseplant mix. It's nice and chunky and barky and like well draining. Love that stuff. For things like anthuriums and hoyas and epiphytic cactus, I use their anthurium and orchid mix, because that's even chunkier and like good for those nice epiphytic, semi-epiphytic plants. And then I use their fresh sphagnum moss, which I really love, in all of my moss poles. I prefer it to the dried stuff, and it's all like sustainably sourced as well, which I really like. And then I use their semi-hydro substrate as well instead of something like lechuzepon. I have used both their fine and their coarse stuff. I think I lean more towards preferring their coarse stuff these days, though pretty much all of the stuff I have is a mix of both, because I just recycle semi-hydro over and over again, and it all just gets mixed together into one big mix with small rocks and bigger rocks. But those are my sort of favorite substrates. I don't really use anything from anyone else, and I haven't for years, so I can't really recommend other things. And unfortunately, Soil Ninja is only UK and EU rather than US, so all of my North American and the rest of the world friends, sorry, I cannot personally suggest other things. For fertilizer, I fertilize pretty much every other water throughout the year. I say this in all of my videos, but because I have an artificial environment in my home that's warm in the winter, I've got grow lights that keep it bright, and it stays fairly humid, my plants still grow throughout the winter. So unless your plants stop growing, I personally would recommend continuing to fertilize all year round. And currently the main fertilizer I'm using is Formulex. I think this is the same, or at least very similar to Foliage Focus, which is I think the Australian version. But I personally really like this one because it's cheap and cheerful and does like really good things for my plants. You can also buy a big 5-liter bottle, and that's what I did, and I kept refilling my single liter, which I quite like. If you want something organic, and like good for microbiome in your soil, if you're like trying to build up your microbiome, or like you've got a terrarium with springtails, all that stuff in, highly recommend using liquid gold leaf, because this stuff is like, it'll keep the microbiome living and well. It's also like neutral pH and organic and stuff. I do really like this. I've used this for years as well. It is a little bit more on the expensive side, but a little goes a long way with this one. And then I've also used Kaylee Ellen's Nurture System 1. I liked this one as well. It's just a little bit more expensive, and like it doesn't have the like microbiome friendly thing that liquid gold leaf has. So if I'm feeling like splurging on my plants, I will get this every now and then as like a little extra boost, but it's totally not necessary. I will also say that I even water my semi-hydro stuff with these fertilizers. All of these work perfectly well for hydroponic growing or semi-hydro growing. Grow light wise, I'm not going to go into it in any sort of real detail because I have done a whole video on like a grow light deep dive, I think 2 years ago now, where I like showed every single grow light I had in my collection and like talked about the light output and what I use them for and the pros and cons of each of them and stuff. So I will link that down below in the description as well. I have gotten a few more grow lights since then, so I can link those too, but for the most part everything's in there, and I use grow lights a lot. What I do use with my grow lights and for like all of my cabinets and stuff is smart power strips. Highly recommend smart power strips, because then I don't need to go around and turn on every single one of my grow lights every day. I can have them plugged in and programmed. They can actually connect to Google Home, which is what we use for our Wi-Fi and our stuff like that. So I can do all of that stuff and like all of the automations and whatnot in Google Home, which I freaking love. And I've been able to set up my grow lights to turn on, like different ones turn on at different times. Like my cabinets turn on in the morning, places that are darker turn on quite early, and then things that are in brighter spots generally that I just want a little extra boost of light, those will turn on. I think I have them set for an hour before sunset, which I really love that you can do. Then it's only going on when it's starting to get dark, which I really like. And I can also like manually turn them on in my app. And then everything, all of my grow lights automatically turn off at 10 p.m. And so when I'm like getting ready to go to bed, they all just turn off, and I love that. So highly recommend smart power strips. It makes my life so much easier. I also have this little light meter here that I use in my home every now and then. I don't tend to use it all that often, but I do find it really useful when I was originally sort of placing plants within my home, when I was sort of like just figuring out where things go and how much light was about in my home, or if I'm putting in a new grow light. I find it really useful to see what sort of light output that they have and figure out what plants will ideally go underneath them. So I really like this. I know you could use apps on your phone, which are apparently pretty decent, but I do kind of like having a full separate thing for it. It just feels a little bit more like I know what I'm doing. And then the final category I have is a sort of miscellaneous category, things that don't necessarily go in other spaces, but I find incredibly useful in my home. One, potting mats. I freaking love potting mats, especially in my small flat where we don't even have a dining table. If I want to pot things, I don't have any like hard surfaces I can easily wipe down or clean, and so getting like plasticky potting mats or even fabric ones that are like coated makes cleanup of repotting and stuff so much easier. I can kind of pick it up and like dump it in the bin and then shower off the potting mat, and it just saves me from like ridiculous amounts of like hoovering and tidying up after repotting sessions. So highly recommend these. I absolutely love these, and I'm sure people who have places where they could possibly repot without making a huge mess use them as well. But for us small home people, this is like a godsend. Also for repotting, I freaking love scoops. These are technically food scoops that I got online. It came in a pack of 3, and I think Joe's using the 3rd one for like coffee or something. But I really, really like these for soil. It makes it cleaner as well. I don't have to like get my hands all up in the soil all the time, which I do love getting my hands in soil, but like you can be a lot more precise getting the soil into the pot with these sort of scoops, and just generally makes my life easier. This guy is my semi-hydro scoop, so this just lives in my box that my semi-hydro's in, and I use this to scoop it out because I hate the feeling of wet semi-hydro sticking to my hands. So like this is like an absolute necessity. Where my soil scoops I wouldn't say are necessities, this one to me absolutely is. And like precise pouring, so incredibly useful. And then we have dusting gloves, which are super useful for dusting your plants, which is a good thing to do to help your leaves stay nice and clean, to help them photosynthesize better, and your plant will grow better because it'll produce more energy. But I really like these because you could just use a microfiber cloth, but I find it a little bit more difficult to get into nooks and crannies using a cloth, and with the gloves I can kind of just better feel what I'm doing. I can use both hands and just like get all up in the leaf and make sure it is nice and clean. You do just need to make sure that if you have pests at all, you're not spreading them using the dusting gloves, so keep an eye on that. But I find that these make dusting so much easier and so much more accessible, even though I still don't do it very often. Oops. Also for semi-hydro, I have this pot here, which I use as a semi-hydro boiling pot to sanitize my semi-hydro, because you can reuse that stuff over and over. And so whenever I take a plant out of semi-hydro or like repot it into a size up, I'll give it fresh stuff, and then all of the old stuff that was in there will go into this to be recycled and boiled for a little while. But the reason I love this pot specifically, I found it at IKEA in the UK. I don't think, as far as I know, that they have it in the US IKEA or other places in the world. I've heard comments that they don't. But why I love this pot, ooh, excuse me, is because it has a mesh insert in it, which is so incredibly helpful. When it's done boiling, I can just lift this out, sorry for the noise, lift this out and pop it to the side to let it all drain out before putting it back into my pond box. So incredibly useful, and it's not massive or anything, so I do usually have to do things in batches, but it works well enough for my needs, and I found it like the perfect product for what I need it for. I know it's not the intended use of this product, it's probably like for like pasta or something, but semi-hydro boiling. Hydrogen peroxide is also a really useful tool in my planting. I tend to use it to deal with plants with root rot. When I experience that, I mix up a sort of 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 3 to 4 parts water solution, and I'll just dunk the plant and the roots into that in order to help like deal with all of the sort of bacteria and issues that are like causing the roots to rot, and hopefully usually that slows down that process and can potentially save your plant. And then lastly, I can't actually show you this because I'm actually using all of them in my home, tension rods. Oh my god, tension rods are so freaking useful and fairly renter friendly as well, because you don't need to screw anything into the wall. I have several places, mostly in the bedroom, where I have used a tension rod to either hang grow lights, which works really, really well and means that I can have a grow light from above in an alcove without having to screw it into the wall, or in windows, so I can hang plants in the windows and I don't need to, again, worry about putting hooks into the wall or anything to help them stay up. So I found them incredibly useful. I used them in my old flat when I was renting. I use them here even though we own our flat. I find them really good to kind of like extend the space in our home. You know, like I want to use every available surface and more for my plants, and having tension rods is kind of the perfect way to really get the most out of your space. Oh, goodness, there we go. That is all I think, of the plant supplies that I use within my home, that I love, that I've tried and come back to time and time again. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you feel like you've found some cool, useful things. Everything will be linked down below in the description. So if you need anything from this video, the link will be down there if I have it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other houseplanty things you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to keep growing. Bye!